Thank you. Good evening. I want to thank the Feminist Press, Scholastic, Gloria Jacobs, everyone, but especially all the young women who are working so very hard to express their lives and to tell us their stories. I was asked to talk a little bit about my own journey, which I rarely do. I like to write stories and about everybody else's lives. But I'm very happy tonight because if I had had an organization like Girls Right Now when I was a young woman, I can't begin to imagine what my life would have been like. Nevertheless, I tried. I feel as if when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I felt as if hearing about Girls Right Now as if I had put my voice, my poems, I didn't know they were poems then, my stories, into a bottle, and I sent it off into the ocean. And many years later, Girls Right Now found that bottle, and it proliferated into all of these wonderful voices. I am the daughter, my story really begins with my mother, and I am also the daughter of a curandera who signed her name with an X, who was my nurturer. And my mother was a Purepucha Indian from Mexico. Not from Mexico, the Purepucha Indian people are from Mexico, but my mother was born in the United States. A little part of US history that people don't know about is in the great boom of the United States, Mexican labor was welcomed and invited here. My mother was born here at that time. In 1929, with the stock market crash, she was deported, although she was born here, and sent back to Mexico, and sent to Mexico. She wasn't from Mexico. Mexicans, many, many thousands of Mexicans were sent back in cattle cars. My mother came back to the United States, and I was born in Chicago. I thought I was going to be a visual artist, and as a little girl, I liked to draw and paint, and that's what I thought that I was going to do. Eventually, I grew up, was writing. My mother was in the audience one day. People always ask, when did you start writing? And I always said, well, I decided to be a poet when I was around 19, 20, 21 years old. Just so all of you know who are going to be published writers, when you have someone in your family in the audience, they will be the ones that will be being your fact checkers. My mother, may she rest in peace, was in the front of the audience. My mother never spoke English, but she spoke English that day, and she sat up. She raised her hand when I said I had been writing since I was maybe 19 or 20 years old, and she raised her hand and she stood up and she turned around and she faced the whole audience and she said, she has been writing since she was this big. What I remember then, I went back and I thought about that, and what I remembered was that when I was a little girl and my mother worked in a factory, I didn't have a writing paper or drawing paper. But one day she came home with a little pad. It was a hard kind of paper. It was put together with very rough glue. And this pad was used in the factory to keep their quotas up because she was on the assembly line and she had to keep a quota up. She brought this pad home for me to draw. When my grandmother, the curandera that I mentioned that signed her name with an X, when she passed away, I began to write in that pad. I didn't know what that was, what I was writing at that time, except that all the kids in the playground at the Chicago Public School where I was attending wanted me to write things like that for them too. And what I realized at that time, at 9.5 years old, was that I had begun to write what would later be considered poems. I'd like to share with you a poem that I wrote as a very young woman. It's called We Would Like You to Know. It's very important for me to write without mentors, without role models, without anything in print that spoke to me about the women like my mother and my grandmother, to put those words down on paper. So one of the things that I wrote was a poem called We Would Like You to Know. We would like you to know we are not all docile. nor revolutionaries, but we are all survivors. We do not all carry zip guns, hot pistols, steel cars. We do know how to defend ourselves. We do not all have slick back hair, distasteful apparel, unpolished shoes, although the economy doesn't allow everyone a Macy's charge card. We do not all pick lettuce, run assembly lines, clean restaurant tables, even if someone has to do it. We do not all sneak under barbed wire or wade the Rio Grande. These are the facts. We would like you to know we are not all brown. Genetic history has made some of us blue-eyed as any German immigrant and as black as a descendant of an African slave. We never claimed to be a homogeneous race. We are not all victims, all loyal to one cause, all perfect. It is a psychological dilemma no one has resolved. We would like to give 1,000 excuses as to why we all find ourselves in a predicament, residents of a controversial power, how we were all caught with our pants down, and how petroleum was going to change all that. But you've heard it all before, and with a wink and a snicker left us babbling amongst ourselves. We would like you to know guilt or apologetic gestures won't revive the dead, redistribute the land or natural resources. We are left with one final resolution in our own predestined way. We are going forward. There is no going back. It's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Lee. Gracias.